The night was unusually quiet. The man sat alone in his dimly lit living room, staring at the flickering glow of the television, though he wasn't watching. It was just background noise, something to fill the silence. The house felt empty, too empty. Then, out of nowhere, a loud knock echoed through the house. It was late, far too late for visitors. His heart jumped slightly. Who would come knocking at this hour? Another knock, louder this time. He hesitated. A strange feeling crawled over his skin. The kind of feeling one gets before something life-changing happens. Slowly, he stood up, making his way toward the door. His mind raced with possibilities. A lost traveler? A neighbor needing help? Or something else entirely? When he finally swung open the door, he froze. A tall man stood in the doorway, dressed in an expensive black suit. His face was shadowed under the dim porch light, but there was something familiar about his presence, something that made the air between them thick with unspoken words. The man at the door didn't introduce himself. He just stood there, silent. But his eyes carried a weight, something deep, something that made the man's stomach tighten. Then, without warning, the visitor pulled something out of his pocket. It was a small, crumpled piece of paper. The man's breath caught in his throat. That paper, he knew it. It was impossible. This couldn't be happening. The visitor finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady, but held something beneath the surface, something unshakable. Do you remember what you did for me, 15 years ago? The words hit like a wave. The man staggered back slightly, gripping the doorframe for balance. 15 years ago? His mind raced. His past wasn't perfect, but it wasn't remarkable either. Just a life filled with routine, struggles, and small acts of kindness that had long been forgotten. But suddenly, a memory surged forward, one he hadn't thought about in years. A starving boy. A cold night. A warm meal. Could it be him? His eyes dropped to the paper in the visitor's hand. The very note he had written all those years ago. How? Why? What did this man want? Before he could ask, the visitor took a slow step forward and whispered. You saved my life. But now, I'm here to change yours. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. You saved my life. But now, I'm here to change yours. The man's grip on the doorframe tightened. His throat felt dry, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked at the well-dressed stranger standing before him, tall, confident, like someone who had seen things, survived things. And yet, there was a softness in his eyes. A look of deep gratitude. I don't understand, the man finally managed to say. His voice was barely above a whisper. The visitor didn't answer right away. Instead, he unfolded the crumpled piece of paper and held it up between them. The man squinted in the dim porch light, trying to make out the faded words written across it. Then, like a key unlocking a hidden door in his mind, the memory came rushing back. 15 years earlier. The night had been bitterly cold. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying the distant sounds of the city, honking cars, hurried footsteps, laughter from strangers wrapped in warm coats. The man had been walking home from work, exhausted. His job was nothing special, just another 9-to-5 grind that barely paid the bills. Life had been rough, but he was used to it. Then he saw him. A small boy sat on the sidewalk near a grocery store, huddled in a thin jacket, his arms wrapped around his frail body. His face was dirty, his shoes were worn out, and his eyes were filled with something the man couldn't shake. Hunger. Desperation. A quiet, painful surrender. People passed by without a second glance. Some pretended not to see him. Others stole a quick glance before looking away, ashamed. The man had stopped walking. He stood there, staring at the child. Something inside him twisted. He had been hungry before. He had known what it was like to feel forgotten. Without another thought, he walked into the store, grabbed a warm meal, and stepped back outside. The boy didn't notice him at first. He had been staring at the ground, lost in his own hopelessness. But when the man crouched down and held out the food, the boy flinched. His body tensed, as if expecting to be hit, scolded, chased away. The man smiled gently. "It's okay. Eat." For a moment, the boy just stared at him, unsure if this was real. Then, slowly, he reached out and grabbed the food with trembling hands. He ate in silence, his small fingers gripping the container like it might disappear at any moment. The man watched him, feeling an ache in his chest. How had the world allowed this? How many others like him were out there? Before he left, he grabbed a scrap of paper from his pocket. He had nothing much to offer, but he scribbled down a few words. Something simple. Something honest. No matter how bad things seem, they can change. Keep going. One day, you'll understand why. He placed the note beside the boy and walked away, never looking back. And just like that, he forgot. Present day. The man stared at the visitor, his mind still spinning. It couldn't be. The starving boy from that night was standing in front of him, dressed in a suit, looking like a man who had conquered the world. You're him," the man whispered. The visitor smiled, a warm, knowing smile. "Yes. And that night changed everything for me." The man felt lightheaded. He reached for the doorframe again, needing something solid to hold on to. But how? How did you go from that to this? He gestured at the visitor, his expensive clothes, his confident stance, ****. The visitor's expression darkened slightly. "It's a long story," he said, his voice quieter now. "A story filled with things you wouldn't believe." The man swallowed hard. He wasn't sure he was ready to hear it. But the visitor wasn't done. Taking a step closer, he said something that sent a shiver down the man's spine. "You saved me that night, but what if I told you that your kindness reached further than you could ever imagine?" The man's pulse quickened. The stranger's words hung in the air like a puzzle missing its final piece. Your kindness reached further than you could ever imagine. The night had been quiet moments ago. Now, it felt charged, as if something big was about to be revealed. The man gestured towards the doorway. "Come in." The visitor stepped inside, his polished shoes making no sound against the wooden floor. The man closed the door behind him, suddenly aware of how different they looked, one dressed in old, comfortable clothes, the other in an expensive suit. Yet, they shared a past. They sat in the dimly lit living room. The visitor leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring at the crumpled note in his hand. "That night," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "was the first time in my life that someone looked at me like I mattered." The man listened, not daring to interrupt. "I had lost everything." The visitor's jaw tightened. "My family, my home, even my will to live. When you found me, I was at my breaking point. I hadn't eaten in days. I was ready to give up." A lump formed in the man's throat. He remembered the boy's hollowed-out cheeks, his empty eyes. "But then, you came along," the visitor continued, his gaze intense. "You didn't just give me food. You gave me hope. And that note." He lifted the worn piece of paper. "That note became my lifeline." The man swallowed hard. He had written it in seconds, not thinking much of it. But to this stranger, no, to this boy he had once saved, it had been everything. The visitor exhaled sharply, looking down at his hands. "I wanted to believe in your words. I really did. But life wasn't easy after that. The streets, they don't let you go that easily. A shadow crossed his face. And that's when everything changed. The man leaned forward, his heart pounding. What happened? The visitor looked up, his eyes filled with something unreadable. I met someone, he said. Someone who saw something in me. Someone who knew who you were. The man froze. Knew who I was? The visitor nodded slowly. I wasn't the only one you changed that night. A chill ran down the man's spine. What do you mean? The visitor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, placing it on the table between them. The man's breath hitched. It was an old photograph. His hands trembled as he picked it up. It was blurry, faded with time, but he recognized the faces immediately. One of them was the starving boy. The other was someone he had never seen before. A stranger, watching from the shadows. You weren't alone that night, the visitor said. Someone else saw what you did. And because of you, everything that followed, happened. The man gripped the photograph, his mind racing. Who was this person? And what did they have to do with him? He looked up at the visitor, his voice barely a whisper. Who was watching me that night? The visitor's lips pressed into a thin line. Then, after a long pause, he said the words that would change everything. Someone who's been waiting for you, for 15 years. The room fell into silence. The man felt his world tilt. Who was waiting for him? And more importantly, why? The room felt heavier now, the weight of the past pressing down on both men. The visitor's expression was unreadable, his gaze sharp but not unkind. I wasn't always alone, he began. After that night, after you gave me that meal, I still struggled. The hunger, the cold, the hopelessness, none of it vanished overnight. He exhaled, his fingers tightening around the small crumpled note he had kept all these years. But for the first time, I had something no one had ever given me before, hope. The man listened in silence, his mind racing. He had no idea that a simple meal and a few words of encouragement could have meant so much. I did everything I could to survive, the visitor continued. But I wasn't strong enough. Not yet. He looked up, his eyes filled with something unreadable. And then, someone found me. The words sent a shiver down the man's spine. Who? He asked cautiously. The visitor hesitated, his expression darkening slightly. A man. A benefactor, though I never knew his real name. He shook his head. He was a mystery. He appeared out of nowhere, offering me a choice, continue struggling alone, or follow him and learn how to rebuild my life. The man's brow furrowed. And you trusted him? The visitor let out a quiet laugh. What choice did I have? I was starving. Homeless. Desperate. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. But here's the strange part, he already knew about you. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. The man stiffened. Me? The visitor nodded. That night, when you helped me, it wasn't random. He leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. You think you were just an ordinary man who showed kindness to a boy. But that's not the whole truth. The man's pulse quickened. What are you saying? The visitor's expression was grave. I spent years learning from my benefactor, gaining skills, understanding the world, and eventually, finding my own success. But the more I learned, the more questions I had. And the biggest question was why he helped me. The man felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. He had no idea where this was going, but something about it felt off. The visitor leaned in, his voice steady and firm. The truth is, my benefactor didn't just help me. He was looking for you. The man's breath caught. His mind reeled at the revelation. That doesn't make sense. I'm nobody special. A knowing smile flickered across the visitor's face. That's what I thought at first, too. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized the truth. He reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out something small and metallic, a worn silver emblem. Your past, your choices, none of it was an accident. The man stared at the emblem, a strange sense of familiarity creeping over him. What is that? The visitor's eyes locked onto his. It's proof that you're more important than you think. A sharp silence filled the room. The visitor took a slow breath before delivering the words that would change everything. You weren't just some kind stranger that night. You were being watched. You were chosen. The man felt the floor shift beneath him. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. But the visitor wasn't done. And now, he said, his voice quiet but firm, it's time for you to know why. The air in the room seemed to crackle with tension. The man's hands tightened into fists at his sides, his mind spinning. Watched? Chosen? None of it made sense. The visitor placed the emblem gently on the table between them. The dull silver glinted under the dim light, its surface worn with time. What are you talking about? The man asked, his voice unsteady. The visitor leaned forward, his eyes locked onto his. 15 years ago, someone took notice of you. Not because of your wealth, your job, or your power, but because of what you did that night. The man shook his head. I bought a hungry kid a meal. That's it. The visitor's lips curled into a knowing smile. That's where you're wrong. He tapped the emblem with one finger. They don't look for money, fame, or influence. They look for something else, something rare. A cold shiver ran down the man's spine. Who are they? The visitor hesitated. A group that exists outside of what most people believe is possible. They don't advertise their presence. They don't seek recognition. Their only mission is to observe, guide, and, when necessary, intervene in the course of human history. The man's chest tightened. What does that have to do with me? The visitor exhaled. They've been watching humanity for centuries, searching for individuals who have the power to change lives in the smallest but most profound ways. Not with money. Not with technology. But with simple, human actions. He tapped the table lightly. Your kindness that night wasn't just a small act to them. It was proof of something far greater. The man swallowed hard. This is insane. The visitor nodded, as if he expected the reaction. That's what I thought, too. Silence hung between them. The man stared at the emblem, his mind screaming at him to push it away, to tell the visitor to leave and never come back. But something deep inside whispered a different truth. Why does any of this matter now? He finally asked. Why come back after 15 years? The visitor's jaw tightened. His next words sent a chill down the man's spine. Because they've been waiting for you. A stunned silence followed. The man shook his head. I don't understand. Waiting for what? The visitor exhaled, his gaze filled with something between urgency and understanding. For you to make a choice. The man's heart pounded. A choice? The visitor nodded slowly. They don't recruit people. They don't force anyone into their world. They wait for the right moment, when a person is ready to step forward. He leaned in slightly. And tonight, I was sent here to ask you one thing. The man felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. The visitor's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you ready to know why I'm really here? The room felt impossibly small, as if the walls were closing in. The man's pulse pounded in his ears as he stared at the visitor, who sat across from him with an unreadable expression. Why are you really here? The man finally asked, his voice hoarse. The visitor took a slow breath, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, black envelope. He placed it on the table, sliding it forward with deliberate care. "This," the visitor said, tapping the envelope, "is an invitation." The man frowned. "To what?" The visitor's gaze didn't waver. "To step into a world that most people will never know exists. To join something far bigger than yourself." The man stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A small, knowing smile played at the visitor's lips. "Because you were chosen. Not by them. Not by me. But by your own actions." The man shook his head. "That doesn't make any sense. I don't have any special skills. I'm not rich or powerful. I'm just," he hesitated, suddenly unsure of himself. "You're just a man who changed a life without expecting anything in return," the visitor finished. "And that is what makes you rare." The man exhaled slowly. "And what if I say no?" The visitor leaned back in his chair. "Then you go on with your life. No one will bother you again. You'll never hear from me, or them." His expression darkened slightly. "But you'll always wonder." The man swallowed hard. "Wonder what?" The visitor held his gaze. "What you could have been a part of." A heavy silence filled the room. The man's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to the visitor. "What happens if I say yes?" The visitor's expression didn't change. "Then your life as you know it is over. The moment you accept, there's no turning back." He gestured toward the envelope. "Inside is a location. If you show up, you'll get your answers. If you don't," he shrugged. "The choice is yours." The man's heart pounded in his chest. He had spent years believing his life was ordinary, that his struggles, his choices, his moments of kindness were just moments. But now, he was being told that they had led to this, an invitation to something bigger than he had ever imagined. He reached for the envelope but hesitated. His fingers hovered over it, doubt creeping in. The visitor studied him for a long moment before speaking one final time. "You never know how one act of kindness can ripple through time." The word settled deep in the man's chest. The visitor stood, buttoning his jacket. "I won't ask again," he said. "But I'll leave you with this, some doors only open once." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, his steps slow, deliberate. He pulled it open, pausing only for a moment before stepping into the night. The man sat frozen, staring at the envelope in front of him. His entire life had been leading up to this moment, and he hadn't even known it. He swallowed hard. Then, with a deep breath, he reached forward and picked up the envelope. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of something far greater than just paper inside. The man turned it over in his hands, his heart pounding in his chest. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windowpane, but the real storm was within him. Everything in his life had led to this moment. One small act, feeding a starving boy, had started a chain of events he never could have imagined. And now, he had a choice. He placed the envelope on the table and ran a hand through his hair. His mind screamed at him to be rational. To question everything. This was insane. A hidden organization? A secret purpose? It sounded like something out of a story, not real life. But then he thought about the visitor, about the boy he had once helped. He had seen the truth in his eyes. Whatever this was, it was real. And more than that, it had always been bigger than him. The words of the visitor echoed in his mind. You never know how one act of kindness can ripple through time. 15 years ago, he had saved a boy's life without even realizing it. And now, that same boy had returned to change his. His fingers traced the edge of the envelope. He could walk away, pretend none of this had happened. Go back to his quiet, uneventful life. But if he did, Would he ever forgive himself for not knowing? His pulse quickened. Some doors only open once. Taking a deep breath, he tore the envelope open. Inside, a single slip of paper bore an address, written in precise, elegant handwriting. No instructions. No explanation. Just a place, a time, and a decision. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and stepped toward the door. Because sometimes, the smallest choices shape the greatest destinies. And this time, he was ready.